Well, rights groups have roundly criticised the new laws, calling them a huge setback for the country. Well, now defamation articles also make it illegal for people to insult the president or criticise state ideology.
The government should focus on fulfilling people's civil rights, the economy and culture, such as job vacancies, healthcare, and etc. They should have passed laws related to that. Instead, they passed a law that is not democratic, controls our private lives, and does not take care of public matters. It is a setback for our country, which had fought for reform, and now we are moving backwards.
Well, Arise Chief Correspondent John Cookson has been monitoring developments, and he joins me now from London for more. Good to see you, John. So a sweeping change in Indonesia that could have drastic consequences. Tell us more about the revision of this criminal code.
You covered most of the main points, but this issue of unmarried people sleeping together, if they're caught living together, they could be jailed for a year. But let's just step back a little bit. First of all, there are other countries in the world that have equally restrictive laws, and I'm thinking here of the Gulf states who go a little even bit further than that, even more draconian measures. But they seem to rub by fine. I mean, Dubai is one of the pleasure gardens of the world, and somehow people aren't sent to prison there. Secondly, the prosecution only occurs when either the child or the parents or the spouse of one of the parties complains. So the Australians who go to Bali in their hundreds of thousands every year, let's say Shane and Marlene go along for a nice holiday in Kuta Beach. Are they at risk? No, of course they're not, because their children, their parents, or their other spouse are not going to prosecute in Indonesia. So the Australian newspapers have called it a Bali bonking ban, which I think is really a bit of a stretch. The people it will affect are the many Indonesians who have certain Muslim sects who have more than one wife. Then it's going to become a little bit complicated. And although this law has been passed by all parties in Indonesia, a massive country, the biggest Muslim country in the world, 267 million people, I think internally it could cause one or two problems for those in these kind of loose marriages, if I can put it that way, Charles. The thing that also concerns me is not about this. It's the fact that it may be an attack on the freedom of the press in Indonesia, because it's very strict, the new law to make it a criminal offence to criticise the president or indeed other public figures. Now, I can think in certain circumstances, newspapers, radio and television in Indonesia might be restricted by this new criminal code. So on the face of it, yes, it's a great story. I don't think it's going to affect foreigners too much for the reason that I gave. Internally, there may be problems with multiple spouse marriages in Indonesia, but the freedom of press, that should be taken seriously.
Well, absolutely. And beyond the bonking ban, as you put it, it's interesting that supporters of these new laws are justifying them by saying that they've applied qualifications to make them a little harder to implement. But it is a reflection, is it not, of a very broad conservative swing in official attitudes in Indonesian politics?
Yeah, but it was always the case in certain areas in Indonesia, like Aceh, where they still have public floggings and amputations, Charles, and they are part of Indonesia. What I found it interesting is that it also chimes with stricter laws in countries like Iran and certainly Afghanistan, where the Taliban have started their old tricks of flogging and amputations in public places of so-called offenders to Sharia law. So we have some nations in the world also pursuing a similar strictness of Islamic law, which I find interesting. But I'm not comparing Indonesia with Afghanistan and Iran, but they are different. But this pressure on the people through the use of religion and on religious grounds, I think is interesting.
Well, what I find quite extraordinary, really, is that I understand that many Indonesians support this as well. But I'm curious, because you mentioned the conservative countries like Iran and Afghanistan, but if you look at some of those Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, they've actually been easing some of their stricter more controlling laws. And I'm wondering why there's been this shift towards this much more conservative attitude, which seems to go contrary to what we're seeing in many similar countries around the world.
Yeah, don't mistake easing of restrictions for something bigger than that. For example, Iran, it was widely reported in Western media that they'd relaxed the ban on hijabs, that hijabs could be freely worn, more freely worn than they are at the moment. And that just is not the case. Also, Saudi Arabia is opening up to the West in many ways. But I suspect once tourists start pouring in their hundreds of thousands, as the Saudi Arabians hope, then I'm just wondering whether they'll be reeling back on some of the restrictions that have been eased for Western visitors, as has happened in Dubai from time to time. Dubai has a bit of a crackdown every now and again when women go topless on the beach in Dubai and people start holding hands and sleeping together in hotels when they shouldn't. Then the police do act from time to time. So it's all cyclical, and I think this is the same in Indonesia right now. It has the support of all parties in Indonesia, this new criminal code, and that has to be remembered. So presumably is supported in large part by the people of Indonesia. But things change. I mean, the world is changing. Our morals are changing constantly. And I think possibly this is just a phase for Indonesia.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, John, when you say that many ordinary Indonesians support this new sort of revision of the criminal code. John, thanks as ever. John Cookson, Arise Chief Correspondent, talking to me there from London.